Private Officer Kirsty Stoner. Very good afternoon to you all. And let's get started, actually, with the first question. It's actually from Anton, and he's talking about this issue of the two-child cap. He says, with the removal of that two-child limit for child benefit, how will the government ensure that working parents receive fair support? And it's been a big issue, hasn't it, Jess, to you first, for lots of parents, been a big political issue as well. What would you say to Anton?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember that the two-child cap wasn't on child benefit, but it was on the child-related universal credit that could be claimed. So for working parents, they can still claim child benefit for their children. Granted, it's a lot less than if you were claiming the child-related universal credit portion. But obviously, there are parameters that need to be met in order for you to claim that. Your child has to be under 16, or they have to be under the age of 20 and in education. Okay. So one thing to be aware of if you are a working parent and you are going to claim child benefit is that higher earners will have to repay it through the high income benefit charge. And so that's something to be aware of. Obviously, with the lifting of the two-child limit today, it means that people who have children who are born after April 2017 will be able to claim the universal credit portion, the child-related portion of universal credit for all of their children now. So that works out at about £292 a month per child. So big boost for those.
Significant, decent. It's a boost that obviously many within Labour, and indeed, I think the former Prime Minister Gordon Brown have been campaigning a lot. They argue it's the greatest way to raise children out of poverty in this country. But it does, of course, cost money, and previously essentially been opposed by the Labour Party. Let's move on to this idea, the big issue today, I would suggest, which is the frozen tax threshold. And we've got this question from Caitlin, who says that the frozen tax threshold plus the triple lock rise, I think, means that I'll be over the personal tax allowance next year. I have a very small income from a private pension. I've never filed a tax return in my life. I wouldn't know where to start. What do I need to do? Io is with us here. What should she do?
It's a really good question, Caitlin, and I can understand why you feel a little bit like a deer in the headlights right now, because this is something that lots of people will be grappling with if they are retired and if they're getting even quite a small income from either a workplace or a private pension. They will face the prospect of having to pay more tax on those pension withdrawals after, of course, they've taken their tax-free lump sum worth 25%. That is available to anyone from the age of 55. But Caitlin, I think what is possibly reassuring is that you're not probably going to have to fill out a self-assessment tax return. So instead, this process will happen automatically. If you are liable for tax, then essentially it will be deducted by HMRC in liaison with your pension provider. So yes, you mentioned the fact that you have a private pension. Essentially, it's up to HMRC to make sure that you're on the correct tax code and that then your private pension provider will deduct the correct amount of tax via the PAYE system. So hopefully you won't have to go and pay that tax yourself. It will just be taken from your pension withdrawals.
And what I find extraordinary about this, just on a wider point, is, I mean, it is not a surprise people are confused about all of this. I mean, it is, in this country, it is kind of insane, our tax code and the complications and the various levels and the codes. Yeah. I mean, people do find this stuff very, very difficult.
And I think people are really surprised at the idea that they would be taxed, even if they're claiming, a state pension and not very much on top of that from a private or workplace pension. There was some helpful clarity from Rachel Reeves today around those who are just getting an income from their state pension. She said that they wouldn't have to pay any tax that was owed if they bust their personal allowance. But yeah, I mean, the backdrop to all this is that if these tax thresholds did rise in line with inflation, we would see that personal allowance of £12,570 go up by several thousand pounds. Yeah. And then that effect would be really felt by those on lower incomes, those who are having to kind of eke out an income from their pension, who could really in many cases, do without an extra tax bill at this time.
And Kirsty, just before getting on to the next question, people trying to plan this, trying to work all out of this.
Yeah.
I mean, people will use financial advisors, of course. Well, those people won't or can't afford to or whatever. What are the other tools that just ordinary folk, people watching this programme, can do to work out what is best for them when it comes to their own personal finances?
Definitely. So I guess there's tools online that can help you with calculating how much tax is due. So HMRC, the .gov website, does have some calculators you can use. So you put in your income. And I think what we've noticed in the last year is people have been getting more interest from their savings and not necessarily previously had to declare that savings interest that they were getting because it was quite low. Because interest rates have been so high over the last few years, we've found a huge amount of people are having to complete a tax return, which is a really daunting experience for the first time. So there's .gov is there's money helper services people can use as well, just to get a guidance on where they should be going.
OK. Let's move on to our next question. This is from John. He's asking, by changing the amount you're allowed to save of your own money in cash ISAs from 20 grand down to 12, is the government encouraging people to gamble in the stock market instead? I wouldn't necessarily gamble. There's been a big argument, hasn't there, Jess, from the government essentially saying, I think Rachel Reeves made this point, that if you'd actually invested years ago, you'd see a greater return if you'd gone into the stock market rather than an ISA. What's the government trying to essentially do here? Is it for all of us to kind of not put money away and let it sit there? It's more to try and invest it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what Rachel Reeves is trying to do, not only to get us investing in stocks and shares, but also to boost the economy, boost the markets, But the problem is that a lot of savers opt for a cash ISA, A, because of the tax benefits of doing so, but also because they're quite safe. It's a safe option with that tax-free benefit with it. So there's been a lot of concern in the lead up to the budget and after the budget that this cut to the tax-free cash ISA limit is going to, instead of getting people to invest in stocks and shares, it's going to get them to withdraw their savings and put them into regular savings accounts or try and find a different way to save. And that's not good for anyone.
Is it fair to say, though, the government here have got a point, you guys, in the sense that, Americans, for example, are way more willing to invest in the stock market and they do get greater returns. And kind of us Brits were just a bit too cautious.
Well, I think what's interesting is that Rachel Reeves has acknowledged that older people may have a reason to be cautious. Now, I don't want to spell out the reasons for that, but, older people do not feel that they have that same time to be able to take risks in the stock market, because the conventional advice is you need to be invested for at least 5 years to ride the highs and lows of the stock market roller coaster. Whereas young people, you're absolutely right, Darren, maybe they could be taking a little bit more of a risk. And we have actually seen young people getting more and more into stock market investing. Whether this kind of hard shove into investing via this slightly crude, blunt measure of, reducing the cash ISA allowance will further fuel that investing boom remains to be seen. But certainly, to Jess's point, people definitely need to be aware of the tax implications of saving, especially, as you were saying there, how people can end up paying tax on their interest with interest rates going
And Kirsty, the thing is, just we're talking about kind of financial planning and tools. I mean, it is a lot easier if you do. I mean, there's more options now to kind of invest your money in lots of different ways, in a much easier way than there's ever been before.
Definitely. So I'm actually a huge advocate for people starting to invest as early as possible. So getting your kids into the stock market sooner rather than later is the best thing you could do. I think it is worth pointing out that what they are saying is that the ISA allowance is £20,000. That's the same for anyone. If you're under the age of 65, you can only put £12,000 into a cash ISA and £8,000 can go into a stocks and shares ISA. And for the average person, the ability to save £20,000 a year is far beyond most people's means. So if you're able to save £1,000 a month into a cash ISA, regardless of your age, then that's obviously quite a strong position to put yourself in. But I think the real issue is actually not necessarily having these rules in place, but trying to put some education in place so that people at school can learn and understand that it's not gambling, that it's a very sensible thing to do, and actually having money languishing in cash is as much of a gamble for young people.
Yeah, I find it extraordinary that time and time again, various governments always talk about what we need in schools is better financial education, and yet, frankly, it never seems to happen. Right, let's move on to the next question. It's from Felicity, asking, what does this all mean for inflation? Are we going to see higher interest rates as we go forward? The cost of living is already high. And Kirsty, we're probably going to see the opposite, aren't we?
Hopefully, that's what Rachel Reeves is hoping. So the whole point of this fiscal policy is to hopefully bring back inflation so it's not going to continue to roar as it has previously. Actually, they are ahead of where their expectation was on inflation, so actions have delivered, so they have come down further. So the hope is that the taxation and the policies they put in place would not encourage inflation to grow any further.
OK. The other big question, of course, facing lots of people today is around the pensions, because Stephen has sent in this question asking would a reduction in the salary sacrifice scheme disadvantage the private sector only, which by and large are pensions based on savings, as opposed to the public sector, which already has massive contributions and final salary payments, which essentially obviate from this need. And Jess, this has been a big announcement today that will have a lot of impact on people. Just explain what the government have done today in terms of pensions and what they're allowed to do.
Yeah, so what the government have changed is that you'll now only be allowed to put £2,000 into your pension through a salary sacrifice scheme. And when you do that, you don't have to pay national insurance on it, and nor does your employer. So they've capped that amount at £2,000 a year.
Which, by the way, it seems, correct me if you're wrong, it's quite low.
I thought the same. You guys,
Yeah,
I'm assuming?
definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Yeah.
in particular, if you are earning just above one of those tax thresholds, then, £2,000 could potentially make all the difference. It could mean that you are able to go into a lower tax band or not in the case of today.
Exactly. And, salary sacrifice schemes for pensions are generally used by higher rate taxpayers because it helps to bring their taxable income down. In terms of the question that Stephen asked, we do know that around a third of the private sector use a salary sacrifice scheme at the last count. Don't have an exact figure on that. And there are some suggestions that just 10% of the public sector use a salary sacrifice scheme. So there is a chance that private sector workers will be affected by it more than public sector workers. But I think it's just something that is a really clear reminder that we all need to go home and look at our pension schemes and how our own ones work.
And the question, of course, here, Kirsty, is for the critics of this budget. They would say this is going to discourage people for saving for pensions,
Definitely.
which is just going to lay traps down. It's going to, it might raise some money at the moment, but it's going to make things way more difficult down the track.
We've already seen over the last few years quite a serious attack at people's ability to save into pensions in terms of how much pension wealth they could have in their lifetime and how that's taxed when you do come to retirement. So we really want people to make sure they're funding their own retirement rather than having to rely on benefits or a state that can't actually afford to do that for the amount of people that are coming to retirement. I think my call out is please don't be discouraged from saving into a pension. Okay, what you're losing by not doing salary sacrifice, which is what's coming in,
Is far greater.
Yeah, and so the national insurance contribution isn't always passed on to you as an employee. So what they're saying is that you can still put the same amount of money into a pension, but you might not get the national insurance relief that you would be getting from a salary sacrifice arrangement. So it's still hugely tax advantageous to be able to put money into a pension. It's just making sure you're doing it with your employer in the right way.
OK, let's move on to the issue of stamp duty, a big political issue, of course, not least of all because the Conservative Party have argued that they want to get rid of it, and the IFS have talked about how they think it is not terribly good as a tax. But Andrew has asked, has there been a change in stamp duty paid to properties? If so, when is the change happening? We didn't really hear very much today on stamp duty, did we?
No, the bottom line is that this is the dog that did not bark. There were many, many rumours in the run-up to this budget, mainly probably fuelled a little bit by the Conservative Party, but also by concerned homeowners and people who do face massive bills now to buy property when it comes to stamp duty, that actually this is a system that is ripe for reform. Where Rachel Reeves has concentrated her efforts is on the surcharge for those higher value homes, believing that to be a bit more of an elegant
This is the
solution.
so-called mansion tax, if you like.
Quite. Those are not the words that she would probably use, but that is how...
That's the words that we're using.
Exactly. That's how it will inevitably be described in the weeks and months to come. So I think that for now, what we're going to see is instead these kind of surcharges put on higher value properties rather than having an overhaul of the stamp duty system, which is pretty lucrative.
But we should be clear, shouldn't we, Kirsty, that actually this so-called mansion tax, or this additional council tax, if you want to call it, is not going to happen for quite a long time.
Exactly that. And we're also reliant on valuations to come in for properties as well. So the intricacies are being defined at the moment. But a key thing is that it's a property worth over £2 million will start to pay that surcharge. And so that's £2,500 a year, which is not a small amount of money. But the argument that they're saying is that if you have a £2 million property, there's a way to cover that liability or release equity in some form to cover that additional cost.
And just on this, because Janet has come up with a particular impact of all of this, which is she's saying that she's inherited a family home in Islington worth £2 million. And she's talking about downsizing, has been for many years. I mean, in many ways, if the stamp duty hasn't changed, but she might have to pay more tax, it might be quite a sensible time to downsize.
Yeah, everyone's circumstances are really different. You do have, if you have a property valued at £2 million or above, there are options available to people. The difficulty is when you have a property that you might have inherited that you have a real emotional attachment to. So the decision to downsize being forced upon you by a taxation is a really kind of tough pill to swallow.
OK, and we've got one more question from Mickey, which is asking about capital gains tax, Iona. Again, I mean, you know, in relation to this, there was a lot more of a stink about this last year, wasn't there?
Yes, this time round we have not seen changes to capital gains tax, and I think that's because perhaps Rachel Reeves is cognizant that if she wants to encourage people to invest, maybe that it's not the right message to send out at this time, that she is going to essentially tax the returns that people make outside of, you know, ISAs and other tax-free savings vehicles. So that's maybe why she's left that one alone this time.
It is fascinating that, like, if last year's budget was about kind of essentially taxing business a lot more and those mobile wealthy, let's put it like this, this year is much more about ordinary folks like you and I.
Well, it's interesting with the salary sacrifice issue, that is definitely going to affect business because it is a good way for business to be able to cut its national insurance bill. And coming back to what Jess was saying before about how much it will affect the private sector, there will undoubtedly be smaller businesses that will really feel the loss of that because they would have used that money maybe to invest into their business elsewhere, and that's money they won't have anymore.
And I think as well, lots of businesses sort of, when employer national insurance contributions went up at the last budget, put a lot of employees onto salary sacrifice to try and mitigate those extra costs. So the fact that Rachel Reeves has now taken that away as well, they're already battling with high costs, and now that's been added on to it.
Just, you obviously are very heavily involved in our money blog, which is great all the time, and our weekly newsletter that goes out that lots of people have signed up to, and indeed often sending questions and stories to you guys. The Chancellor today said this was kind of effectively a cost of living budget to try and mitigate some of the rises that we've seen recently. And we got announcements around energy bills, didn't we, and train fares and stuff. What's your big takeaway from today? What do you feel like, you know, someone sat at home would go, that's going to make things better or worse? There's always that terrible question of who's won and who's lost, if you like, from today's budget.
I think it's pretty tricky. I think what's hard with this budget is that a lot of the changes have been made to things that people going into the budget might not have known a lot about. Salary sacrifice, I think, is a really big change that's happened. But the majority of people at home, I would guess, don't actually know much about salary sacrifice if they're using it and how it works. So I think it's a real reminder that we need to educate, and we need to go into this and look at what our own circumstances are and make sure that we're in a position that we're not being shafted by all of the changes being made. Yeah,
and it's that reminder to people that, you know, I know it's difficult and people have got busy lives, but actually there are kind of tools and ways and means and people that you can talk to try and work these things out. What did you make, I don't know, this cost of living stuff today, in the sense that, you know, the government have made some efforts genuinely to bring down some bills that have increased quite a lot in recent years. I mean, they keep talking about energy bills. We'll see what happens to them. But on the whole, a lot of people are going to end up paying more tax.
And this is the thing, Darren, I think people's expectations are, rightly or wrongly, quite high. They do want to see action from government because government has been more muscular in recent times. It has intervened very directly in people's personal finances. We saw that during the pandemic. We have seen it during the cost of living crisis. And people might be looking at today's budget and thinking, well, where is that targeted support for my energy bills? You know, why isn't council tax coming down? You know, why is food inflation still as high as it is? These are the main costs that people really feel. And if if you combine that with the fact that they're seeing these headlines around taxes going up in a way that maybe they don't fully understand, but they're getting the message, taxes are going up, it may not end up with Rachel Reeves getting the credit that maybe she's hoping for in terms of that cut in energy bills, maintaining the 5p cut in fuel duty, and all these things that she wants to convey that show that she understands the issues that people are facing right now.
But in the end, isn't it, because it comes down to the fact that I think if one was to add up all the taxes in this country, I mean, the binder would be enormous. I think some of the most complicated tax system in the world. And that, you know, I mean, in many ways it is quite funny, but the other problem is that it leaves people confused, and confused not in a good way, as in there is real concern out there where people feel somewhat all at sea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a key thing as well, in this budget in particular, it feels like they've delayed things happening. So they've made these announcements about tax changes, but they're coming in at various different years. So we've got anything from now till 2029. So salary sacrifice, you've got a few years to figure out what you want to do. But the panic it causes initially, and then the reality is people think, I don't need to worry about that for a few years, when perhaps there's opportunities for them to be a bit more sensible with saving over the next few years while they still have those allowances.
And also people find it very difficult to deal with the ongoing uncertainty that we saw in the run-up to the budget. We saw it even this morning itself when we had the budget leak beforehand. And we were talking, Kirsty, before about how people are just constantly speculating about whether there is going to be changes to pensions, whether there's going to be changes to savings. And that kind of uncertainty means that people put decisions on hold. And that doesn't just have an impact on their own personal finances, it has an impact out there in the economy.
And we've seen that quite a lot, haven't we, particularly when it comes to, for example, buying houses. If you think there's going to be changes to stamp duty, or indeed effectively you think the housing market, because interest rates are going to move up and down, is going to be better or worse, you put off decisions. That slows everything down. What I find fascinating about politics is people often say, oh, inflation's gone up and down, but people aren't feeling it. And it is that sense of, like, you can come up with these big numbers, billions here and billions there, but in the end, it's what people feel they've got in their bank account at the end of every month, or their experience of going into the shop, or indeed buying that car or the TV or whatever it is.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, everyone's really feeling the pinch at the moment. Food inflation, like Iona mentioned, is still really high. And, you know, before we came in here, we had a poll running on the Money blog about whether our readers felt that today's budget was positive or negative, and 75% of them said that it was a negative budget. Wow. So that just goes to show how people are feeling. And I think, you know, we've got to remember as well, with the income tax threshold, even if they get a pay rise, they might be pulled into paying more tax, and that's not going to make them feel like they're becoming any better off either.
OK, fascinating stuff. We really, really appreciate all your time this afternoon, and indeed answering all your questions. That is our Money Live reporter, Jess Sharp. We've got the personal finance expert, Iona Bain, and the chartered financial planner at the private office, Kirsty Stone. Thank you very much indeed. A lot of people have sent in the questions today as well. We really appreciate that. A lot of really good analysis and answers to all those questions. And you've been watching our special budget here on Sky News with the Chancellor today, saying that she is asking ordinary people to pay a little bit more after she did raise those thresholds, or essentially froze them, which means that lots of people will be paying income tax in the years ahead. But she has also decided to end the 2-child welfare cap on the budget. That is a significant move for lots of families that may well see poverty lifted for those families, particularly if they've got more than 2 children. The Conservative Party, though, has branded the budget a total humiliation, while the Lib Dems has said you cannot tax your way to growth. And be in no doubt, tax is going to increase, with the government's tax take going to reach an all-time high of 38% of GDP by the start of the next decade. OK, that is it for us on this special coverage of the budget. Coming up in, just a couple of minutes at 5 o'clock, it is Mark Austin with the News Hour. But before that, here's a look back at some of the events today here at Westminster, in which Rachel Reeves delivered her second budget, leaked online beforehand, but one that will determine the future of the UK economy and indeed this government.
Chancellor, is this budget about your own survival? Will it be your last?
It looks like the Office of Budget Responsibility has accidentally published this document with the core set of forecasts for this budget.
This has been the most chaotic lead-up to a budget in living memory. With resignations, hostile briefings and leaks galore, even just in the last 10 minutes. An unprecedented leak.
The premature disclosure of the contents of the budget has always been regarded as a supreme discourtesy to this House.
We launched an investigation into that. It will report to the Treasury Committee of Parliament and to the Chancellor. We apologise for the error.
I have never seen anything like it, and it actually meant when the Chancellor stood up, no one was listening to her frame her budget.
We beat the forecasts this year and we will beat them again. By boosting trade, not blocking it, by increasing investment, not cutting it, by championing innovation, not stifling it, by backing working people, not making them poorer.
She promised stability, she delivered chaos.